Okay, hearing none, I would like to call to order the committee meetings for the Bellingham City Council. I'm your backup quarterback today. Council President Stone is excused. We have two committees this morning. At 9 o'clock, we start with Public Works and Natural Resources for a half hour, and then at 9:30, we'll have an hour-long meeting of the Climate Action Committee. The first committee, as I said, is Public Works and Natural Resources. I'm the chair of that committee. Joining me are Council members Martins and Anderson, and we have two items. And the first of those items is, I believe it's a update from the Broadband Advisory Work Group. This work group was created a year or two ago, and they're here to present an update to the City Council on their efforts to date and scheduled to complete their work. Spencer Moore is a advisory work group member who will be making a presentation on behalf of the work group. Mr. Johnston, do you want to say anything before we hear from Mr. Moore?
Just that the work group is working really hard. They're getting near to completion. We expect that we'll get the first look at the draft report from the Magellan consultant who's been working on that at their next meeting the first week in May. But with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Spencer Moore, who's done a good job working to prepare this presentation, and leave it to him.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to share my screen real quick. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Moore, and I'm a member of the Broadband Advisory Work Group. Thanks for allotting some time to discuss our current progress and deliverables. For a primer, the work group has been meeting for over a year, trying to address Bellingham's relationship with broadband and how its future is tied up with access to this service. So as an overview, what have we done so far? We have primarily been working on foundational information gathering and discussing a policy necessary to write our final report. We've met with other municipalities in our region like Anacortes and Mount Vernon, and we've been discussing the technicalities of municipal broadband. We want to learn from the cities and counties who've done this work before us. We've also been in contact with the port in conjunction with the county and the state's relationship with these layers of development. With these discussions, we've been addressing a number of network models that are possible for Bellingham. Between all these talks, we've also been busy defining terms necessary to frame and contextualize all of these recommendations. Definitions will be elaborated upon later on in the presentation. To supplement all of these talking points with data, we've been working with our consultants at Magellan Advisors to better frame the broadband landscape as it is in Bellingham. Magellan Advisors provides planning, engineering, grant development, implementation, and management of technology that is based around fiber and broadband networks. They have a strong history of working with municipalities to determine what fiber and broadband solutions work for a given community. And they also help implement and figure out a way to pay for that service. They've worked with over 400 different municipalities and counties, and they've been really helpful so far. In order to help the group provide these recommendations, Magellan designed and distributed a survey and speed test that assesses what people in Bellingham are experiencing with their internet connection to home currently. They've reported that the survey has some of the best response rates out of any municipality that they've worked with, which signals that this issue is extremely pertinent for Bellingham. Magellan is working to form a granular assessment that Eric talked about, and we will be including that in our final report and recommendations. Yeah. So on to definitions. These have been super crucial in our discussions and frames how we consider policy. Considering time, it's impossible to condense over a year's worth of discussion into a 10-minute presentation. For further reference, I think that there's an expanded definitions document in the handout. I know it's a big deal for the council to have these definitions. I know it was a big ask on the onset, and the group is taking that super seriously. In brief, I'll be defining broadband internet as a technology, availability as an access issue, affordability as a financial constraint, equity as a method of inclusion to remove systemic injustice, and quality as a baseline of speed and reliability. So first, we'll start with broadband. In telecommunications, broadband is wide bandwidth data transmission, which transports multiple signals at a wide range of frequencies and internet traffic types that enables data to be sent simultaneously in fast internet connections. The medium can be coaxial cable, optical fiber, wireless internet, and other technologies. The working group has decided to recommend a minimum speed of 150 megabytes per second upload and 150 megabytes per second download that scales to 1 gigabyte per second by 2028. This is modeled after the state standard, but on a faster timescale. The state has a slower timescale based on the inclusion of rural counties in Washington. But because Bellingham is urban and in some special cases already has access to business class gig speed internet, the group sees Bellingham is able to accomplish this higher speed standard due to our urban density and ability to scale. So everyone likes to think about price when considering broadband. Every Bellingham household and business should be able to afford high-speed broadband that meets their financial criteria and is sufficient for their respective welfare needs. This includes, but is not limited to, things like telehealth, remote learning, remote work, business web apps, and things like teleconferencing through Zoom. The service should be cost competitive with reasonable rates based on those achieved by other comparable US cities. Affordability is not a fixed price. What is affordable to some is not affordable to others. Next, we have availability. Every business and resident within the city limits and its urban growth area, regardless of demographic or digital literacy, should have available a net neutral, reliable, quality, high-speed broadband system. We should ensure access to services for both housed and unhoused residents through access points like libraries, public facilities, parks, schools, shelters, and service agencies and organizations. While the city doesn't necessarily have to provide these services directly, it is imperative that we consider all residents of Bellingham, regardless of their housing status. Which brings us to my favorite subject, equity and inclusion. I've spent the most time thinking about this definition personally, and our work group has had a profound series of discussions on equity and inclusion and how these issues relate to our digital landscape. Digital equity is a condition in which all individuals and communities have the information resources necessary for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. Digital equity is necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential services. Digital inclusion requires intentional strategies and investments to reduce and eliminate historical, institutional, and structural barriers to access and use technology. Digital inclusion ensures everyone has access to the resources necessary to digital equity. They're tied together. Quality is defined as an internet service provides uninterrupted speed at peak use hours, is reliable, and has a low latency. This can be measured by conducting a clear, natural feeling two-way teleconferencing with anyone else in the world who also has a high quality internet connection. In addition to this, quality is also the ability to use most, if not all, of the purchased bandwidth, even during peak use times. Since the pandemic, most times are now peak use times. With higher rates of remote learning, telecommuting, and fundamental changes in healthcare and telehealth, the quality of a connection is necessary for full participation in our society. So to recap, broadband is defined primarily by its download and upload speed and how reliable the services under load. Affordability is not always a pricing scheme or metric. It involves meeting people where they are at financially. Availability deals with both the physical access of the network, like fiber, and the ability to connect our most vulnerable population to resources that allow them access to broadband services. Equity is a complex subject, but in our use case, we want to focus on our most vulnerable and technically challenged people and supply them with service and respect. Quality is a metric that is both technical and common sense. It should make sense that you use the service that you pay for at the rates that you pay for. There are technical barriers to this issue, but they are solvable. Finally, thank you for your time. There are abundant resources with more information, both technical and non-technical, on the link below on the city's webpage. And I'm happy to address any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Spencer. Committee members. You can go ahead and stop sharing your screen, easier to see people. I want to say, Spencer, thanks so much for defining those terms. I helped write that language, and I knew exactly what I meant when I said equitable, affordable, and quality services, and I'm glad you worked it out. We had originally hoped that the work group would have their recommendations to us already. I do appreciate your taking time for quality recommendations. I just want to ask whether or not you think you're going to get where you need to go. Do you know where you're going and you believe you can get there, or is there some additional input or guidance or support you need from the city?
I think that based on our working relationship with Magellan, once we get that data, we'll be able to start really synthesizing all of the things that we've been working on over the last year into one cohesive document. I think the work group has a pretty solid list of recommendations that we can frame things better with data. So we have some ideas on business models, but we need to know things like, how do we pay for it? What does the city have right now? Like there are a few ex officio members in our work group who have been helping us figure out, like, all right, is there actual gig speed internet in Bellingham? At the start of the group, we didn't know things like that. So with Magellan's report, we can start getting those final questions answered.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, I have another issue, but go ahead, Lisa.
I may not have caught this, but when do you expect them to have their report finalized and then to you to start digesting that work? And then from there, I guess, you know, what Michael was trying to frame around is, when do you think the report will come back based on getting Magellan's report, doing the work, and then getting something back to council? What kind of timeline going forward do you estimate we might be looking at?
I think next meeting is next week on the 2nd, or not the 2nd, on the 3rd. So Eric, I think we have a timeline that has September as our like firm. There will be no other. we will not take longer than September to deliver a final report. So that's our hard end date. But we've already been working on the meat of that report. I think we have meetings summarized. We have a definitions document. We have some, I'm not sure what there's a subcommittee that's busy drafting different parts of that report. Eric, do you know?
Well, just in terms of, excuse me, specific schedules. So yes, Magellan Advisors draft report will be presented to the work group on May 3rd. That meeting, of course, is open to the public and is televised, or not televised, is broadcast over Zoom. We expect that report to be finalized at the meeting in June. And then the work group members should be, they are working towards a presentation to the council as early as July, but probably in August at this point, with the council resolution giving them their direction to be done by September of this year. So the July, August, September timeframe, we expect to have information back to the council. As Spencer reports, there's various pieces being worked on, working towards hopefully a rather succinct recommendation to the council with some voluminous support documents to lead up to that conclusion. But we are expecting to see progress. So again, the biggest of schedule is as Magellan presents their report to the committee on May 3rd. Finalization of that report will occur in June, and then the committee will work to finalize their work in June, July, and probably August.
It's hard to overstate how important that Magellan document is to frame our recommendation. We really want data to support, what we think is right for Bellingham. So
I appreciate that and the timeline, because we'll be kind of getting heavily into the budget for fall for the next 2 years. And so if there are some asks for infrastructure, or other things, we'll want to consider that this fall, so that we're not having to figure out amendments, 6 months into it. So I'm glad to hear
Absolutely.
it's coming back in September.
And we should have price recommendations as well. I think that's a part of Magellan's report.
It is one of the elements of scope of work that was required in the council resolution is a full cost model to deliver fiber to the premises. So essentially providing a municipal owned fiber system to each property within the city. That will not be inexpensive, but that gives us an opposite end of the spectrum. So we have where we are today, and the opposite end of that spectrum, and all points in between could be somehow, connected the dots together. So when Mr. Moore talks about, the business models approaches, that's also under Magellan's task to give options and ranges for, and look forward to seeing recommendations from all of the groups on that. The ex officio, some of whom are the private providers in our community, are involved in the process as well, and we expect to see some input from them as we take it to the next step. So it should be interesting.
I really appreciate the fact that we're looking at the full range, from the city doing nothing more than we're doing now to everything and many points in between. As I see it, there are 2 sets of policy recommendations that could come forward. One of those is sort of what is the best thing for our community in terms of service levels and availability. And then the second thing, which is harder, is and what should the city do about it? And what is the city's role, as opposed to the role of the private sector, the role of the port, the role of the PUD, the role of state broadband agencies, or, what is the city supposed to do about it? And I think that's the harder but more important question, because that then goes to what Lisa was talking about. Okay, so what is the city supposed to do? How big is our lift? What do we do about funding that? So, Spencer, I assume the work group will be addressing not only the bigger picture, but also the specific, what the heck should the city do part?
Absolutely.
Great. Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, those are for information only. Thank you very much. We'll now go on. Spencer, take care. I'll go on to the next item, which is a bid award for what's known as indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, and it's with overhead door repair services. The city is seeking to consolidate overhead door maintenance and repair services into a single unit price contract. The city received 1 bid, which was publicly open on February 3rd. Overhead Door Bellingham was a responsible bidder who submitted the lowest responsive bid of $46,861.52. This bid amount is based upon the estimated quantity of services to be performed during each year of the contract term. And the contract provides a 3-year term and a not to exceed amount of $175,000 if there is indeed a lot of work to do. So as I understand it, this work is payable only upon services rendered, but this basically ensures that we have a provider available and with a guaranteed price to the city. Is there anything more you'd like to say about this, Mr. Johnston?
No, this is, we do a fair amount of repairs on our overhead doors. Just for context, we have overhead doors at fire departments, police, ambulance stations, at public works operations and parks operations, and they're heavily used, and so they need a constant state of repair. So we do several of these repairs throughout the year. What this contracting mechanism lets us do is still accomplish the same type of work at roughly the same cost, but it vastly simplifies the administrative burden of trying to get those contracts put in place. So we've done a couple of these over the last year, these IDIQ type contracts. They're a different mechanism of contracting, and it really lessens the bureaucratic burden of getting these things taken care of. So our recommendation is to approve.
Committee members. Lisa?
I actually don't have any questions. I was just going to move approval. It makes sense for these small work contracts to be done in this manner. saves staff time, which saves the city money over the big picture. So I always appreciate looking for these opportunities.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to recommend approving the award of the bid. We had only one bidder. I live in a building where we have overhead door too. And I looked and I think we went with overhead because they were about the only players in town. Is that more or less true? Or are we concerned about the fact that only one person bid? The price seems reasonable, I assume.
The prices that we're seeing for this bid are comparable to the prices we are currently paying. And oftentimes we use overhead door to do those repairs as well. So we're happy to keep them on board and move that forward.
Any further discussion? Okay, if not, I will now call the question. All those in favor of recommending approval of the award to overhead door signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, I'll bring that forward with a positive recommendation tonight. That concludes the committee meeting for Public Works and Natural Resources. The next committee scheduled